I want you to picture a perfectly mundane morning.
Okay, set the scene.
You hear a distant rooster crowing, kind of cutting through this damp morning mist.
Mm-hmm.
And down in the soft, dark dirt, there's this distinct, just unmistakable snuffling and grunting.
Oh, I know where this is going.
Yeah, it's a very large black pig, and it is just rooting aggressively through a meticulously planted garden.
A total nightmare for a farmer.
Exactly. You hear the creak of an old wooden gate swinging in the breeze, and then there's just a long, heavy, exasperated sigh.
That is the sound of a man who is watching months of back-breaking agricultural labor just vanish right into the stomach of a farm animal.
It really is. So it's the morning of June 15, 1859, and we're on San Juan Island in the Pacific Northwest.
Right.
Lyman Cutlar, who is an American settler, is just staring at this pig. And looking at the historical accounts we have, this is not a one-off event.
No, not at all.
This specific pig has basically been treating Cutlar's potato crop like an all-you-can-eat buffet for days.
Yeah, the pig was definitely a repeat offender.
So Cutlar, he just turns around, walks into his cabin, grabs his rifle, walks back out into the dirt, and shoots the pig dead.
Which, on the surface, seems like a completely unremarkable local nuisance, right? Just a farmer protecting his livelihood.
Right, happens all the time.
But when we synthesize the historical records, the international treaties, and the military dispatches sitting in front of us, that single gunshot over a potato patch acts as the catalyst for one of the most instructive diplomatic crises of the 19th century.
It's wild. We are doing a deep dive today to unpack how this one deceased farm animal triggered a 12-year military standoff between the United States and the British Empire.
A literal standoff over pork and potatoes.
Yeah, we are talking about a localized garden dispute that just rapidly pulls in naval warships, heavy artillery, and thousands of heavily armed soldiers.
It escalates so fast.
But the mission of this deep dive isn't just to gawk at the sheer absurdity of the escalation, though it is absurd.
Oh, it is deeply absurd.
We are examining what is really a masterclass in diplomatic restraint. We're looking at a microscopic view of how geopolitical systems fail under ambiguous rules.
Exactly.
And how massive disasters can actually be actively averted by the deliberate choices of the people on the ground. Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can even look at the pig or the potato patch, we have to look at the cartography.
Yes, the maps are everything here.
We really need to jump back 13 years to 1846.
Right, so to understand 1846, you have to look at the geopolitical landscape of the Pacific Northwest in the 1840s.
It was a bit of a mess, right?
A huge mess. It was defined by these overlapping, deeply entrenched claims. The United States and the British Empire had actually been operating under a treaty of joint occupation for decades.
Kind of just sharing the space.
Exactly, sharing the massive Oregon territory. But by the mid-1840s, American expansionism was just reaching a fever pitch.
Manifest destiny and all that.
Exactly. You had the Polk administration running on this super aggressive platform of 54-40 or fight.
Meaning they wanted the border drawn way up north.
Right, demanding the entire territory all the way up to the Russian-Alaska border.
Which Britain was obviously not going to just hand over.
No, Britain had really deep economic interests in the region, and those were primarily managed by the Hudson's Bay Company.
Which was a huge deal back then.
Massive. So to avoid a catastrophic war that frankly neither side wanted or could easily afford at the time, the diplomats sat down and negotiated the Oregon Treaty of 1846.
Okay, and the intent there was just to draw a clean line across the continent, right?
That was the goal. They agreed on the 49th parallel.
Which makes total sense if you're just looking at a flat piece of paper. You just take a ruler, drag it straight across the map until you hit the ocean. Done.
Right. But the actual text of the treaty explicitly stated that the boundary would run along the 49th parallel westward to the middle of the channel, which separates the continent from Vancouver's island.
Okay, to the middle of the channel.
Yeah, and then it says, and thence southerly through the middle of the said channel, and of Fuca's Straits to the Pacific Ocean.
Through the middle of the said channel. I mean, that sounds perfectly unambiguous.
Until you actually look at a real nautical chart of the San Juan Archipelago.
Right, because there is no single defined channel there.
No, there isn't. There are two entirely distinct bodies of water that you could reasonably call the channel.
Two of them.
Yes. You have the Haro Strait to the west of the San Juan Islands, which sits right up against Vancouver Island.
Okay.
And then you have the Rosario Strait to the east, which sits closer to the North American mainland.
And sitting right smack directly between those two major waterways is this big cluster of islands.
With the most prominent one being San Juan Island itself.
I am looking at the diplomatic correspondence leading up to this treaty, and I really have to push back on the competence of these negotiators.
Oh, it's definitely questionable. Like, how do the highest diplomatic offices of two global superpowers sign a legally binding territorial treaty without realizing there is an entire archipelago of islands sitting right in the exact middle of their designated border?
It seems crazy.
Did they just simply not look at a map?
Well, they did look at maps, but they looked at fundamentally flawed, really outdated maps.
Ah, of course.
Yeah. The British diplomats were relying heavily on these charts, drafted by Captain George Vancouver way back in 1792.
So like 50 years prior.
Right. And Vancouver's maps detailed the Rosario Strait extensively, but only because that happened to be the navigational route he took.
He just charted where his boat went.
Exactly. He barely even charted the Haro Strait to the west. So, to the British government sitting in London, the Rosario Strait was obviously the channel, because it was really the only substantial waterway detailed on their primary navigational documents.
But the Americans had a totally different set of maps, didn't they?
They did. They were relying on charts produced by the United States Exploring Expedition, which was led by Charles Wilkes in 1841. So much more recent maps.
Yes. And Wilkes had mapped the Haro Strait in deep detail. He actually noted that it was the wider, deeper, and just generally more direct route to the ocean.
So the American diplomats just naturally assumed the Haro Strait was the channel.
Exactly. The negotiators in 1846 used this really broad geographical language to describe a very specific, highly complex topography that honestly neither side fully understood.
It's just wild. They created this massive structural vulnerability in international law just by using the word "the."
Pretty much. By failing to name the specific strait, by just saying the channel, both nations developed entirely reasonable, legally sound interpretations of the exact same treaty language.
Right, because if you draw the line down the Haro Strait, like the Americans believed, then San Juan Island falls on the U.S. side.
Yep.
But if you draw the line down the Rosario Strait, like the British believed, then San Juan Island is British territory.
You've got it perfectly.
It's like signing a roommate agreement that says, whoever cleans the kitchen gets the good parking spot.
Okay, I like this.
But your apartment building has 2 parking lots.
Yeah.
And you both just assume it means the one closest to your own bedroom window.
That is a perfect analogy. And this wasn't just some abstract legal theory being debated in a courtroom.
No, people actually live there.
Exactly. By the late 1850s, this drafting error literally birthed a bizarre dual reality on the ground on San Juan Island.
Because we see 2 completely distinct models of colonization just crashing into each other.
Right. On one side, you have the Hudson's Bay Company. And we have to remember, they were not merely a commercial trading firm.
Right. They weren't just selling hats.
No, they operated under a royal charter from the British Crown. In these really remote territories, the HBC was, for all practical purposes, the proxy government of the British Empire.
Wow.
They had magistrates, they enforced laws, and they managed massive agricultural operations.
So they were deeply established.
Very. They had actually set up a significant sheep and pig farm on San Juan Island, which they called Bellevue Sheep Farm, and they were operating under the absolute legal certainty that they were standing on British soil.
And then right alongside them, you have these American settlers starting to arrive.
Yep.
Operating under the whole philosophy of manifest destiny and these American preemption laws.
The homesteaders.
Exactly. These were civilian homesteaders who just firmly believed that if they found unoccupied land on what they considered U.S. territory, they had the full legal right to just claim it, clear it, and farm it.
So you have 2 legal paradigms that are just entirely incompatible.
Completely.
The Hudson's Bay Company viewed the American settlers as illegal squatters who were trespassing on Crown-chartered corporate property.
And the American settlers viewed the Hudson's Bay Company as this giant foreign corporation that was unlawfully operating on sovereign American soil, just trying to monopolize the resources, which honestly makes the failure of the governments back in London and Washington even more glaring.
Oh, absolutely.
Because they realized relatively quickly after 1846 that the map was ambiguous. They knew there were 2 channels.
Yeah, it didn't stay a secret for long.
So if they recognized this massive legal blind spot, why did they just let it simmer for 13 years? Why allow actual civilians to start homesteading on contested ground?
Well, it comes down to diplomatic inertia.
Meaning they were just slow.
Basically, resolving a border dispute requires organizing international commissions, funding naval surveys, and ratifying entirely new treaties through often very hostile legislative bodies.
It's a lot of red tape.
It is. And in the 1850s, the United States was deeply distracted by the escalating domestic tensions that would eventually lead to the Civil War.
Right. They had bigger domestic fish to fry.
And Great Britain was dealing with their own massive conflicts in Crimea and in India.
So neither side really wanted to deal with a few rainy islands.
Exactly. The administrative machinery of these empires moved at a glacial pace, while civilian ambition, moved at the speed of a wagon train.
It just kind of beat the government to the punch.
Yeah. The governments essentially left this huge administrative void on San Juan Island.
They basically built an arena, threw two fundamentally opposing groups of people into it, and just turned their backs and walked away.
That is exactly what happened. Which brings us right back to June 1859, the potato patch, and Lyman Cutlar's rifle.
Right, the pig incident.
So the sources indicate that Cutlar's actions immediately after shooting the pig are actually super critical to understanding how this whole escalation occurred.
Because he didn't just shoot it and walk away, right?
Right. He did not shoot the animal as some kind of grand political statement about sovereignty. He was just a really annoyed gardener.
Yeah, I'd be annoyed too.
But realizing he had just destroyed property belonging to the heavily resourced Hudson's Bay Company, Cutlar actually walked over to the British-Canadian farm manager, a guy named Charles Griffin, to try and negotiate.
And if I'm reading these historical accounts correctly, Cutlar really did try to settle this financially.
He did.
He actually offers Griffin $10 for the dead pig.
Yeah.
Which completely shifts the narrative, right? It goes from this malicious destruction of property to just a kind of botched, localized financial negotiation between neighbors.
Exactly. And $10 was actually a reasonable, if maybe slightly low, market rate for a pig at that specific time.
So he wasn't trying to rip him off completely?
No. But Griffin's response is where the dual reality of the island's legal status completely shatters the negotiation.
How so?
Griffin doesn't just reject the $10, he demands $100.
$100 for a single pig in 1859.
Yeah.
I mean, that is an extortionate sum. That's not a negotiation over the price of pork anymore. It's basically a punitive fine.
That's a great way to put it.
Griffin is essentially trying to tax Cutlar for his very presence on the island.
That is exactly the subtext of the interaction. And Cutlar, acting as the sort of rugged, self-reliant American frontiersman, flatly refuses to pay the $100.
I wouldn't pay it either.
He allegedly tells Griffin straight up that the pig was trespassing on his land.
And Griffin counters by stating it is British land.
Right, and therefore Cutlar is the trespasser.
So the argument goes from, hey, your pig ate my potatoes, to you have absolutely no legal right to exist on this dirt.
Exactly. And because they can't agree on a price, Griffin escalates it to a mechanism of state power.
Oh, boy.
The British colonial authorities, who were operating out of nearby Victoria on Vancouver Island, officially threatened to arrest Lyman Cutlar.
Arrest him over the pig.
Yes. They planned to send a British magistrate to physically apprehend an American citizen, transport him off the island, and try him in a British court under British law for the destruction of British property.
Oh, for the American settlers, this is the absolute nightmare scenario.
Totally.
You have this small group of just a few dozen farmers who firmly, genuinely believe they are living in the United States, suddenly facing the prospect of armed agents of a foreign empire dragging them away.
Right.
It is a literal existential threat to their sovereignty and their personal liberty.
And because the settlers lacked any sort of local U.S. judicial authority to appeal to, they did the only thing they could think of. They drafted this regent petition requesting military protection and forwarded it to the United States government.
So the interpersonal dispute over the pig is now entirely subsumed by the dispute over the island itself.
What's fascinating here is how quickly local interpersonal disputes morph into massive issues of national sovereignty when borders are ill-defined.
It's incredible to see the exact mechanism of escalation play out here. Like, if Griffin just accepts the $10 or maybe counters with 15, the entire military history of the Pacific Northwest changes.
But almost certainly.
Or even if Cutlar had just invested 2 extra days into building a stronger fence around his garden, none of this happened.
Yeah.
It really exposes how much of global geopolitics is just human ego and the stubborn refusal to lose an argument disguised as national pride.
Absolutely. So the settlers petitioned for a shield. They just wanted a federal deterrent to prevent these British magistrates from harassing them.
Right, just send a guy with a badge to tell the British to back off.
But the military apparatus they appealed to operated under a completely different set of incentives.
Uh-oh.
The petition lands on the desk of U.S. Army Brigadier General William S. Harney. He was the commander of the Department of Oregon.
I really want to dig into General Harney's background here because from the sources, his psychological profile seems to be the primary engine driving this whole crisis.
He is a very specific type of personality.
Looking at his military record, he is definitely not a man known for a delicate diplomatic touch or, a deep respect for international boundaries.
Not at all. Harney was a hardened veteran of the Mexican-American War and various frontier conflicts. But more importantly for this story, he harbored a deep, well-documented anti-British sentiment.
You just really didn't like him.
No. He viewed the Hudson's Bay Company not as a legitimate commercial enterprise, but as this aggressive foreign monolith that was just slowly creeping into American territory.
So he was already biased.
Heavily. When Harney read that petition detailing how British authorities were threatening an American citizen on land he firmly believed to be U.S. soil, he did not consult with the State Department.
He didn't ask his boss.
He did not wait for authorization from Washington, D.C. at all. He just decided on his own to exert martial force to settle a diplomatic ambiguity.
So he basically acts as a rogue agent.
Yes.
He bypasses the entire federal architecture of the United States.
He issues explicit orders to assert unilateral American sovereignty over San Juan Island.
Wow.
He dispatches a company of the 9th U.S. Infantry, which consisted of exactly 66 men, to land on the island, establish a military camp, and physically prevent any British authorities from exercising jurisdiction.
Okay, and the man he chooses to lead these 66 soldiers is Captain George Pickett.
Yes.
Which is just a fascinating historical Easter egg for anyone listening who studies the American Civil War.
Oh, absolutely.
Because this is the exact same George Pickett who, just 4 years after this pig incident, will lead the completely catastrophic Confederate infantry assault known as Pickett's Charge at the Battle of Gettysburg.
The very same man. And Pickett, much like Harney, really had a penchant for dramatic, highly aggressive action.
They were two peas in a pod.
They were. So in late July 1859, Pickett lands his 66 men on San Juan Island, and he sets up camp directly adjacent to the Hudson's Bay Company farm.
Just right in their face.
Right in their faces. He issues this grand proclamation declaring the entire island to be under the military jurisdiction of the United States. And he immediately begins constructing earthworks and preparing his men for actual combat.
I am just trying to picture the reaction up in Victoria right now.
Oh, it was explosive.
Like, you're James Douglas, the governor of the colony of Vancouver Island. You were dealing with this minor annoyance about a dead farm animal, and suddenly an armed American military force occupies an island that your government claims, and they're setting up a fortified military camp right next to your sheep farm. That is basically an act of war.
Governor Douglas was absolutely incensed. You have to remember, he had spent his entire career working in the Hudson's Bay Company before he even became governor.
Oh, so this was deeply personal for him, too.
Very personal. To him, the American landing wasn't just a border dispute. It was an illegal invasion of sovereign British territory by a hostile military force.
When his response is immediate, isn't it?
Yes, and it is vastly disproportionate to the 66 men sitting on the beach.
Because Douglas doesn't just send a magistrate anymore.
No.
He sends the actual Royal Navy.
He dispatches the HMS Tribune, which was a very powerful British warship commanded by Captain Geoffrey Hornby, straight to the waters off San Juan Island.
Just to intimidate them.
Well, the Tribune was heavily armed and carried a full contingent of Royal Marines, and Douglas's initial instructions to his naval commanders strongly leaned toward actually landing those Marines and physically expelling the American soldiers from the island by force.
So let's picture this. We have 66 American infantrymen sitting in a hastily dug dirt trench, just staring out into the bay at a Royal Navy warship that is pointing heavy cannons directly at their camp.
It's a terrifying visual.
And Pickett's response to this overwhelming show of force is completely unhinged.
Yeah.
He doesn't ask for parley, he doesn't try to talk, he just sends word back to Harney asking for more troops.
And General Harney, true to form, doubles down.
Of course he does.
Seeing the British naval presence, Harney just starts funneling reinforcements to the island as fast as he can. Over the month of August, the American troop presence swells from those initial 66 men to over 400 soldiers.
400.
Yes. And they actually bring in field artillery, specifically these massive naval guns that they stripped from a ship, and they haul them up a hill and position them to fire directly upon the British fleet.
They are literally hauling heavy artillery up a hill to protect the dirt where a dead pig is buried.
That is exactly what they are doing.
And the British, I assume, respond to the American reinforcements by just sending more ships.
Naturally, the naval buildup becomes staggering. The British eventually mass 5 heavily armed warships in these very narrow channels right around San Juan Island.
5 warships.
5. These ships, the Tribune, the Satellite, the Plumper, and a couple others, they carry a combined total of over 2,000 Royal Marines and sailors.
2,000.
And they mount well over 70 heavy naval guns.
Okay, let's just break down the tactical mismatch here for you listening, because it really highlights the sheer madness of this situation.
It's totally lopsided.
The Americans have roughly 400 men and some field artillery dug into a dirt redoubt. The British have 5 warships with over 70 cannons that are entirely capable of leveling the entire American encampment from the water.
Easily.
Plus, they have 2,000 highly trained Marines ready to launch an amphibious assault. If a shooting war starts here, the American detachment is going to be completely annihilated in less than an hour.
Tactically, it would have been an absolute slaughter. And the American forces were completely outgunned and geographically isolated on an island.
There was nowhere to run.
Exactly. Pickett reportedly stated to his men that if the British attacked, he would fight to the last man, which is essentially just acknowledging the total hopelessness of his position.
He knew they would die.
Yeah. So the island is now totally saturated with men, artillery, and this really dangerous nationalist fervor. All it requires is a single misinterpretation of a signal flag, or just a nervous sentry accidentally discharging his musket in the dark.
Or just an arrogant officer trying to prove a point.
Right. And Great Britain and the United States are instantly plunged into their 3rd major war in less than a century.
We really have to ask how this didn't happen.
It's the big question.
In almost every other historical scenario where you have 2 heavily armed, opposed militaries just staring down each other's cannon sights over contested territory, somebody shoots.
The tension usually demands a release.
Exactly. So why did the guns stay silent this time?
The sources reveal that the salvation of San Juan Island really came down to the rigorous, intentional application of military restraint by the commanding officers on the ground.
Specifically on the British side, right?
Yes. While Governor Douglas was demanding violent action, the actual military execution fell to the naval commanders. And a really critical figure arrives on the scene right at this moment. Rear Admiral Robert Baines.
Who is he?
He was the commander-in-chief of the entire British Navy in the Pacific.
Okay, so does Baines outrank Governor Douglas?
In strict military matters, yes, he does.
Okay.
So when Admiral Baines arrives and personally assesses the situation, he is absolutely appalled by the level of escalation over a pig.
He sees the madness.
Douglas is urging Baines to land the Marines and engage the Americans immediately.
And what does Baines do?
Baines flatly refuses the order.
He just disobeys the colonial governor right to his face.
He does. He exercises his command authority to prevent a massive geopolitical catastrophe. Baines famously declares that he would not involve 2 great nations in a war over a squabble about a pig.
That is a great quote.
It is. He deeply understands the profound consequences of firing that first shot. So he orders all of his captains to maintain a strictly defensive posture.
No attacking.
Right. They are to observe the Americans. They are to project strength by sitting there, but under absolutely no circumstances are they to initiate combat.
It's just a stunning display of professional discipline.
Truly.
Because Captain Hornby on the Tribune, he had the firepower to vaporize Pickett's camp right then and there. And he had his colonial governor literally telling him to do it.
The pressure must have been intense.
But he listens to Baines. He chooses not to pull the trigger. And I think we really have to factor in the sheer isolation of these men out there on the water.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the communication lag in 1859 is central to why this crisis both started the way it did and ended the way it did.
Because there's no internet, no phones.
Right. There is no transatlantic telegraph line yet. To get a message from San Juan Island all the way to Washington, D.C. or London requires sending a ship down the coast to San Francisco, putting a courier on a stagecoach to ride across the entire continent, or sailing all the way around Cape Horn.
So the lag time is measured in, what, weeks?
Weeks, sometimes even months.
So the commanders out on the island are operating in a complete information vacuum.
Exactly. They don't have politicians in the capital micromanaging their every troop movement.
And they don't have newspaper editorials screaming about national pride every single morning, whipping up a frenzy.
Which is a blessing in this case. Because
Right.
when the governments in London and Washington finally did receive the dispatches detailing the standoff,
Weeks later.
right, when President James Buchanan learned that General Harney had just unilaterally occupied an island and provoked the entire Royal Navy without asking for any authorization,
Let me guess, he lost his mind.
the panic in Washington was palpable. Buchanan realizes the United States is literally teetering on the brink of war over a treaty ambiguity and a dead farm animal.
And Buchanan's administration is already trying to manage the severe fracturing of the country right before the Civil War.
Exactly.
The absolute last thing they need, the worst possible scenario, is a war with the British Empire on top of a civil war.
It would have destroyed them.
So how do they walk this back without looking weak?
Buchanan decides to bypass Harney completely. He dispatches General Winfield Scott, who is the commanding general of the U.S. Army, all the way out to the Pacific Northwest.
Winfield Scott is a huge name.
He is a massive, highly respected historical figure. He was a seasoned diplomat just as much as he was a soldier.
So they're sending in the big guns to calm things down.
Literally. And he travels by ship down the Atlantic coast, crosses the Isthmus of Panama overland, and sails up the Pacific coast. It's this grueling journey taking over 6 weeks, explicitly to rein in Harney and de-escalate the crisis.
Okay, so Winfield Scott finally arrives. He takes one look at Harney's deployment on the island and essentially tells him he has completely lost his mind, right?
Pretty much. Scott initiates immediate negotiations with Governor Douglas.
The two adults in the room finally talking.
Exactly. Scott proposes a mutual reduction of forces. He argues that these overwhelming fleets and armies are just a danger to themselves at this point.
Just a powder keg waiting for a spark.
Right. So Scott and Douglas agree to stand down the massive military machinery and implement a temporary joint military occupation.
Because they realize they can't just completely abandon the island.
No, because if either side totally leaves, that looks like a concession of sovereignty.
Right. We left, so you win.
So they agree to just share it. The British withdraw their giant warships and leave just a token force of Royal Marines on the northern end of the island, establishing what becomes known as English Camp.
Okay.
And the Americans significantly reduce their troop numbers, pull back their artillery, and maintain a small garrison on the southern end known as American Camp.
So it's much smaller now.
Yes, the total forces are capped at roughly 100 men per side. And importantly, General Harney is eventually reassigned, effectively removing the primary source of American aggression from the entire theater.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me.
Yeah.
So the immediate threat of a massacre is resolved by October 1859. The cannons are lowered. But the underlying issue, that badly worded 1846 treaty, is completely untouched.
Oh, totally unresolved.
They still don't know who actually owns the island.
Nope.
So how long do they maintain this awkward roommate situation on the island?
The temporary joint military occupation lasts for 12 years.
Wait, 12 years?
Well, full years.
Through the entire American Civil War.
Yeah.
Through the whole 1860s, these two military camps just sit on opposite ends of a small island, basically twiddling their thumbs, waiting for diplomats thousands of miles away to figure out how to read a map.
That is exactly what happens. And when we delve into the logistics of this 12-year occupation, we find what is arguably one of the most remarkable periods of sustained, peaceful military coexistence in modern history.
It's so strange. You'd expect them to be constantly at each other's throats.
Right. The friction you would naturally expect from rival armies occupying the same contested ground simply did not materialize at all.
Because from what I read in the sources, they actually really liked each other.
They did.
The daily life on the island sounds less like a tense military standoff and way more like a very strange, heavily armed summer camp.
That's a great description. The officers of both camps established this deeply cordial, almost aristocratic relationship.
They were throwing parties, weren't they?
Yes. Captain Delacombe, who commanded the British forces for a significant portion of this time, he frequently hosted the American officers for these elaborate dinners.
Just having the enemy over for dinner.
Yeah, and they shared supplies when shipments from the mainland were delayed by weather. They even held joint athletic competitions to keep the men busy.
Like a San Juan Island Olympics.
Kind of. The British Marines would actually travel down to American camp to celebrate the 4th of July.
No way.
Yes. And the American soldiers would travel up to English camp to celebrate Queen Victoria's birthday.
I read that the biggest actual threat to the peace during those 12 years wasn't military aggression at all.
What was it?
It was civilian whiskey smugglers.
Oh, right.
These smugglers kept setting up illegal saloons in the woods right between the two camps. And the British and American commanders basically had to team up to police the civilians because they were ruining the vibe of the military occupation by getting the soldiers drunk.
It's hilarious. They operated under this mutual, unspoken understanding that the border dispute was just way above their pay grade.
Right, not our problem.
Exactly. Their job was simply to maintain a presence without causing an international incident, and they succeeded flawlessly.
It's really impressive.
For over a decade, not a single drop of blood was shed in conflict between the two garrisons.
But I mean, eventually somebody has to make a decision, right? Yes. The United States survives the Civil War, and by 1871, both Washington and London are kind of desperate to clean up all their outstanding diplomatic disputes and just move on.
The post-war cleanup.
Right. So how do they finally break this deadlock over what the middle of the channel means?
Well, they realized that bilateral negotiations between the two of them have completely failed.
They just keep arguing in circles.
Exactly. Neither side can concede the island without losing face domestically. So, in the Treaty of Washington in 1871, the United States and Great Britain agree to submit the entire San Juan Island dispute to binding third-party international arbitration.
They just hire a referee.
They do. And the referee they choose is Kaiser Wilhelm I, the newly crowned Emperor of Germany.
Okay, so they give the map to the Emperor of Germany.
Yes. But Kaiser Wilhelm did not decide the matter personally, of course.
Right, he had an empire to run.
He appointed a three-man commission of highly respected German experts to thoroughly analyze the dispute.
Who were they?
This commission consisted of a prominent geographer, Heinrich Kiepert, a literary scholar and jurist named Levin Goldschmidt, and an experienced diplomat, Johann Grimm.
So they brought in the heavy intellectual hitters.
They did. And these three men spent nearly a year meticulously poring over the original 1846 treaty text, the navigational charts of George Vancouver, the maps of Charles Wilkes, and all the diplomatic correspondence of the era.
Okay, but what was the actual metric they used to finally make the call?
That's the tricky part.
Like, how do you scientifically prove what a vague phrase from 25 years ago actually meant?
The German Commission decided to heavily weigh the actual navigational reality of the waterways.
Okay.
They concluded that the Haro Strait, which is the Western Channel, was the deeper, wider, and just far more direct route between the Strait of Juan de Fuca and the Strait of Georgia.
So it was just a better channel.
Exactly. It was the primary navigable channel. Therefore, geographically and hydrographically speaking, it made the most logical sense as the intended boundary line.
So on October 21st, 1872, Kaiser Wilhelm I issues the final ruling based on his commission's findings.
Yes.
And he rules entirely in favor of the United States.
He does.
The Haro Strait is declared the official border, which places San Juan Island firmly and permanently within American territory.
And honestly, the reaction to the ruling is just as instructive as the rest of the history.
How did the British take it?
The British Empire, despite losing a really strategic piece of territory that they had claimed and physically occupied for decades, accepted the arbitration without a single protest.
Yeah.
They just recognized the legitimacy of the international legal process.
They didn't threaten to re-escalate? They didn't move ships back in?
No, they just packed up. In November 1872, the British Royal Marines held a really moving final ceremony at English camp.
I bet that was bittersweet.
It was. They lowered the Union Jack, they boarded their ships, and they peacefully sailed away, ending the 12-year joint occupation just like that.
So what does this all mean when we step back and look at this entire timeline for you listening?
The whole crazy story.
Yeah, the flawed maps of 1846, the dead pig in 1859, the rogue deployment by General Harney, the 5 warships, the 2,000 Marines, the 12 years of joint military dinners, and the final German arbitration. What is the core lesson embedded in these sources?
Well, the Pig War is a really profound demonstration of how structural ambiguities in law or diplomacy just inevitably lead to conflict on the ground.
Right. If the rules aren't clear, people will fight over what the rules mean.
Exactly. The diplomats in 1846 failed to clearly define the rules of reality for the actual people living in the territory.
They failed the civilians.
But more importantly, it proves that de-escalation is a constant, active choice.
It doesn't just happen on its own.
Never. At multiple points, individuals like Lyman Cutlar, Charles Griffin, and especially General Harney chose aggression, which pushed the whole system closer to collapse.
Right.
But the system was ultimately saved by individuals like Admiral Baines, Captain Hornby, and General Scott, who actively absorbed that tension and just refused to pass it on.
They took the hit to their pride to save the peace.
Exactly. They looked at a loaded weapon and intentionally chose not to fire.
And it leaves us with, honestly, the most absurd, mathematically perfect fact of this entire event.
The body count.
Right. After 13 years of intense geopolitical tension, overlapping corporate and national claims, a massive escalation of global naval power, and over a decade of military occupation.
The entire body count of the Pig War was exactly one.
The pig.
A singular casualty for a massive international crisis.
And I think that matters immensely for you listening to this today.
It really does.
Most catastrophic failures, whether we are talking about historical warfare or a collapse in a big corporate negotiation, or even just a toxic falling out in our own personal lives, they don't start with a massive explosion.
Rarely.
They start with a minor friction, a badly worded email, a misunderstood boundary.
A $10 dispute.
Exactly. And the disaster only materializes because ego takes over. And the human urge to retaliate, to win the immediate argument right in front of us, completely blinds us to the macro consequences.
We want to win the battle and end up losing the war.
Yes. The history of San Juan Island proves that you always have agency in those moments. You can always be the person who breaks the chain of escalation.
It just takes one person to stop it.
You can choose to look at the cannons, recognize the sheer absurdity of the pride involved, and just walk away.
The discipline of restraint is often the very only thing standing between a manageable dispute and total ruin.
So true.
And if we look at the architecture of our modern world today, we're surrounded by our own versions of the middle of the channel.
Oh, everywhere.
We have overlapping jurisdictions in cyberspace that nobody really understands. We have deeply ambiguous international treaties regarding exclusive economic zones in the oceans.
Right, who owns the water?
And we have emerging, completely untested frameworks for the militarization of space.
The maps are just as blurry today as they were in 1846. They're just in totally different domains.
Exactly. So look around at the complex, legally ambiguous systems we all operate within today and ask yourself, where are the geographic or digital boundaries that everyone assumes they understand, but nobody has actually defined?
They're out there.
And when those ambiguities inevitably clash on the ground, who is currently keeping an eye on the garden, waiting for the first trespass to test our modern capacity for restraint?
Who actually has the authority to deploy the ships today, and will they have the courage of Admiral Baines to simply refuse the order to fire?
It's a heavy thought.
That is a profound question to leave you with. Thank you for joining us as we unpack the many, many layers of this extraordinary standoff.
It's been a great discussion.
We really hope this deep dive into the sources gave you a new perspective on how history actually operates on the ground. Until next time, keep an eye out for that distant rooster, the creak of the garden gate, and whatever might be quietly rooting around in the dirt, just waiting to test your patience.